My name is Leonie Walsh, and I will be the chair for this session this afternoon. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am at least meeting today, which is the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Victorian Cleantech Cluster and also have other cleantech sector roles, including Director of the Victorian Clean Technology Fund, Chair of the Centre for New Energy Technologies, and Advisory Board Member for Store Energy. This sector is growing and expanding with significant global funding becoming available. A recent Angel List article referenced a total venture capital investment in the sector in 2020 of $16.4 billion. Some examples closer to home include the Clean Energy Finance Corporation has invested $10 billion in clean energies over the past 10 years. And since 2012, ARENA has supported 543 projects with 1.58 billion of funding that has leveraged nearly 5 billion in additional private and public sector investment. An increased focus on collaboration across the sector is also very apparent, and increased activity around universities, industry and governments working more closely together to drive research and innovation outcomes to help grow our economy and generate jobs. The Minister for Education and Youth, Alan Tudge, spoke at the University of Melbourne recently to launch the University Research Commercialisation Consultation Paper. He said that government would seek feedback from universities, business and the community on new ideas on how we can increase collaboration between business and universities and put our research at the heart of our economic recovery. An increased focus on collaboration across the sector is also very apparent, and increased activity around universities, industry and government working more closely together to drive research and innovation to help grow our economy and create jobs. The Minister for Education and Youth, Alan Tudge, spoke at the University of Melbourne recently to launch the University Research Commercialisation Consultation Paper. He said that the government would seek feedback from universities and business and the community on new ideas on how we can increase collaboration between business and universities and put our research at the heart of our economic recovery, how to achieve high quality research to better translate into the breakthrough products, new businesses and ideas we need to grow our economy and improve our society. And the government will work with any university that is prepared to take a bold approach. More specific to the clean tech sector, previous sessions have highlighted that with the increased focus on the circular economy, waste reduction, and a greater transition to renewable energy, there is a significant demand also for design and research into new materials, new technologies, new business and service models, and an increased focus on data and systems integration. This creates a great opportunity for our universities as both research and skills will be in demand to support this sector growth. The session this afternoon will feature 3 impressive researchers and education sector leaders who are Victorian Cleantech Cluster members, and they will provide some insights into their research partnerships and plans for engaging with this sector. The panellists are Maria Forsyth, Alfred Deakin Fellow from Deakin University, Professor Maria Forsyth, Fellow of the Australian Academy of Science, is the Director of the ARC Industrial Transformation Training Centre for Future Energy Storage Technologies, Store Energy. She's past ARC Laureate Fellow and currently an Alfred Deakin Professional Fellow at Deakin University and an ICA Basque Visiting Professional Fellow at the University of Basque Country. Professor Forsyth is a world leader in electrolyte materials research. She has worked at the forefront of energy materials research since her Fulbright Research Fellowship in 1990 and has consistently made breakthrough discoveries, including polymer electrolytes, ionic liquids, and organic plastic crystals. Our second panellist is Bronwyn Fox, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Enterprise at Swinburne University. Professor Bronwyn Fox is the Deputy Vice Chancellor in University of Swinburne in Melbourne. She's been instrumental in positioning Swinburne at the forefront of manufacturing building extensively on Australia's Industry 4.0 strategy, 4.0 strategy. She's led a number of significant initiatives and global research partnerships through her former role as the founding director of Swinburne's Manufacturing Futures Research Institute, including establishing world's first Industry 4.0 test lab for additive manufacturing of carbon fibre composites with Australia's National Science Agency, the CSIRO. Most recently, Bronwyn chaired an expert working group to write a 10-year horizon scanning report for Australia's chief scientists with the Australian Council of Learned Academies on the Internet of Things. Last but not least speaker is Tim McLennan, Executive Director, Research Partnerships and Translation at RMIT University. Tim McLennan was appointed Executive Director for Research Partnerships in October 2019. The group has responsibility for building key partnerships across industry and government to facilitate research development and innovation translation and exchange to enable RMIT to deliver impact for its partners and society. He has over 25 years experience in strategic research management, international business development, strategic partnerships, as well as technology commercialization and venture management. He has extensive international experience and worked across a number of key industry sectors, including mineral and energy resources, energy technology, water, robotics, sustainability, education, and aerospace. And the reason I wanted to read out their backgrounds because they are incredibly experienced researchers in their own right and also leaders in the field. And given that this is an open panel discussion and you have the opportunity to ask questions, I thought it would be good to have their backgrounds up there. The first topic or question that I want to put to each of the panelists and have each of them respond to is around what research work are they currently, do their universities currently have underway, and what are the industry partners and how were partnerships identified? So if I start with Maria on this first question. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Leonie. Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel as well. It's been a great conference so far. I've really enjoyed what I've heard of it. So at Deakin University, we have a large, I guess, research portfolio and engagement with industry in the clean tech area. My own team, we work in the energy storage or battery area. And that goes all the way from quite basic research, which has been funded through the ARC and government grants, through in the more recent times, the last 5 or 6 years, into research that's slightly higher TRL level, working with a variety of industries, both directly through industry, but also via the training centre that you mentioned before, the Store Energy Training Centre, which is made up of between 9 and 10 SMEs across the batteries, from materials to devices, to implementation of those devices in settings like batteries in agriculture, for example, or batteries in drones for inspecting poles or and whatnot. So, and also a part of a CRCP, again, engaging with industry, 2 SMEs in Victoria, looking at helping them really get a foothold in the energy materials area to be able to sell locally, internationally into the battery market, both electrolytes and electrode materials. And in addition to that, we're also working with FBI CRC, which is the Future Battery Industry CRC, out of Perth, which itself has about 40 or more companies, mostly miners. And what's really exciting, I think, for me, is that we're not just digging stuff out of the ground and shipping it overseas. There's a real incentive now to actually value add to that material, whether it's lithium, lithium salts, whether it's nickel, cobalt, manganese, vanadium, graphite, silicon, where all those things are now being value added to, which is brilliant, I think. And now what we need to try and do is grow that ecosystem to actually make not just the materials themselves, the chemicals themselves, but actually start to manufacture. And we're engaging with some of the companies which is a big ask for Australia, I believe, but there are a couple who have raised capital around that space. But in addition to those traditional lithium areas, we've been working very much on beyond lithium. And for me, looking at the circular economy and sustainability by sodium-ion batteries, which I think Australia has an opportunity to actually have some leadership in and become an early adopter rather than be what we've been in the past. I think, unfortunately, a bit late coming into the game. And the most recent announcement between company in the UK that's the biggest company making sodium-ion batteries, and a company in Victoria with a joint venture looking at importing sodium-ion batteries initially to make packs, but ultimately with the idea of actually making sodium-ion. So our research will hopefully help them develop that technology further. And the last thing I'll talk about, I think, from our perspective, is circular economy and recycling. One of my biggest fears, if you like, in terms of transitioning from coal or fossil fuels to something else, anything else, is that we don't just do it thoughtlessly. That if every single person takes every single one of their lithium-ion batteries out of their phone, their computer, it's a lot of batteries, which basically are going to go into into the dump. We have nothing in Australia really at the moment. We have Re-Electrify. We have a few companies that are interested, dabbling, but there is huge opportunity there to actually look at developing that recycling, repurposing, and reuse market, as well as new technologies that themselves are more circular, like sodium, for example. I've got to take all the time, but hydrogen is the other area Deakin does do, not in my group so much, but we have Warrnambool, HyCell, and there's an initiative there to build fuel cell stacks for heavy vehicles, so large trucks basically that want to do long distances. And they're looking at actually building that capability at Warrnambool, and actually training not just the manufacturing and the research, but also the training of the people, the students, the industry, the community. So that's kind of a snapshot. There's a lot more we do as well in terms of education, but it's a snapshot of what we do in that space.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria.
And if we could have Bronwyn now talk to us about Swinburne University's activities in the clean technology area and the industry partners that they're working with.
Thanks, Leonie. And there are two key things I'd like to talk about. The first one is we're really excited to launch our hydrogen hub in partnership with the CSIRO in February this year. And this is a $10 million program of work that's been supported through the Victorian Higher Education State Investment Fund. It brings together industry with researchers onto CSIRO's Clayton campus, where we're going to be building in partnership with them a hydrogen research refueling facility. One of the key elements to this is we're also partnered globally, and at Arena 2036 at the University of Stuttgart, which is an industry on campus model for doing research there, where they bring more than 40 industry partners onto their campus for pre-competitive research. They're going to be building a twinned facility, which gives us a portal into European markets. It means that we can showcase some of the technology development that we're working on here in Melbourne, here in Australia, to European markets where there's a desperate need to develop new technologies, specifically in relationship to hydrogen. The hub will consist of three elements: the physical refueling facility, which will refuel a fleet of hydrogen cars that will be buzzing around Melbourne in the very near future. It will look at technology development, and we're specifically looking at the intersection of hydrogen and the hydrogen economy and manufacturing. We're looking at how we can develop new storage systems, how we can digitalize hydrogen supply chains, amongst many, many other themes. And then finally looking at social license and acceptance. It's really important that we bring in, the public needs and the understanding of what the consumer wants from the hydrogen economy into our thinking around the development of the technology really early on in the piece. The other thing that we're working on, which is actually right next door to the new hydrogen research refueling facility, is the Industry 4.0 test lab for composite additive manufacturing. We're really excited to be in the final stages of commissioning this piece of equipment. It is a genuine world first, and it will 3D print carbon fibre composites at an industrial scale, so we can make parts that are 2 by 2 metres. It's deeply engaged with industry, as is the hydrogen hub, and we have projects to use it before we finish building the facility, which is quite stressful. It enables us to make parts smarter through the use of digitalisation, and we also reduce the waste enormously through using digital technologies to place the fibre where we need it. We are able to reduce the waste from over 60% to less than 10%. And in addition to that, we're exploring new materials technologies, working with companies who've developed vitrimer chemistries where you can recover completely the resin from the cured composite as well as the fibre and reuse both. So we're really excited about these two particular initiatives.
Great. Thank you very much, Bronwyn. And just to round things off, Tim, could you give us an update on what RMIT is doing in this sector and some of the examples of industry partners that you're working with and plan to work with? Tim, you're on mute.
And how's that?
Yeah, that's great.
It's on mute, how much we've done that in the last 12 months. I was just saying, Leonie, it's really a pleasure to be here today and also to hear the great things that are going on in the broader Victorian community, which really posts a light to your expression, Maria, about what's actually happening in Australia and the roles that we can play. RMIT, as a complementary to some of the points we've just raised, really works across a very broad spectrum. I won't comment on everything, but picking up some of the other points is around, the things, circular economy, such as in construction, is really important. How do we upcycle versus then just recycle? So there's a lot of work that goes in through there. To the point around the digital and Industry 4.0, and there's another area we're looking into is around Industry 5.0, which is a Japanese term, which is about how do we make that human-centric changes that we're going to see in some of these activities we've got, which feeds a little bit into the social license to operate that you raised there, Bronwyn. I think there's also a significant amount of work that occurs at RMIT around design. When we look at design and circular economy, we look at materials, we look, as we were talking before, about new chemistries, the engineering activities. But really importantly also, not to be forgotten, was around that policy process as we start to implement new technologies and have the license process in that. We need to look at the policy settings and the government engagement process so we can actually move forward in a regulatory process around some of these changes. When we look at the energy sector, we're some of the models that we're looking at and that we're engaged with, which has also been raised, is around things like the CRCs, and in particular, Race for 2030, which is a fantastic initiative, and it's very much a national initiative, and it speaks to the whole collaborative nature of the environment we're currently in now. And how do we actually change business, change industry, change energy, and improve energy efficiencies and activities like that in the home? But also look to that skills development, because as we transition through various economic processes here, we are going to be looking at what is our educational needs of industry, and therefore what is the needs of our students and cohorts, and how does that drive some of the changes that we've got there. I think just a couple of parting questions in there. Engagement around industry is a long-term process for RMIT. We really take those long-term partnerships very seriously, but also look at how do we support our industry partners in the evolution of what we're seeing in the circular economies and the clean tech sector more broadly. And to that, some of the uniquenesses, I think, perhaps, is that we do have very much a global footprint. We do have campuses in Vietnam, so we're getting exposure to different marketplaces, and that's that point. And also facilities in Europe, which, to your point, Bronwyn, gives you access into those global marketplaces, which is so critical for Australian industry and for us to actually also bring back those insights that we're seeing from some of those international partnerships. But I'll stop at that point and hand back to you, Leonie.
Yeah, and I think much for each of you, and it's interesting to see the overlap in what you're doing, but also some of the areas of differentiation as well, where you're building pockets of strengths to engage across industry. And that raises the question, there are a lot of opportunities for universities to work together and collaborate through clusters or hubs. How do each of you approach that with regards to multi-university projects and the challenge of getting the best researchers or the highest skilled researchers from each university to work across a single project, as opposed to have a single university focus on a project? Have you got to that point of collaboration, and is that easy or difficult? Maria, you're nodding there.
I'll answer this one. From my perspective, I think it can be difficult, but it can also be, well, we do it. Most of us here, I think, probably would do that. We work across universities through both funded projects, like a funded council, but also where appropriate. If an industry partner comes, like we've got in the battery sector, for example, a company called Calyx in Bacchus Marsh, they're making these high surface area materials for batteries. We collaborate there very effectively with Monash University, where they have expertise in one space and we have expertise in another space, so we collaborate across that area quite well. But the best way that I have found really for collaborating through universities, across universities, funded projects. It's much harder to do when it's an industry funded project. Universities all want to keep things to themselves. That's my experience, not being DVCR or higher up. My experience is it's really tough as a researcher to convince your university that this actually is good to go across two or three or four universities. Well, where's the incentive? Where's the what do we get out of this? There's always a question of what do we get out of this, and that's an attitude I think has to change. We get really efficient and effective collaboration.
Yeah, that's a good response. Bronwyn or Tim, did you want to add to that as well?
Just that I completely agree with what Maria has just said. It is incredibly challenging, but it is possible. And I note and acknowledge the incredible work that Maria's done in ACES, the Centre of Excellence, which has been truly collaborative research, very impactful research across multiple universities. But there are always those questions from the individual university: what's in it for us? What do we get out of it? And one of those, what's in it for me, I guess, value propositions is building a deep relationship with industry. And we're working on a particular program with multiple universities at the moment that I can't talk about quite yet, but I will be able to soon, where the what's in it for me is understanding industry's needs, understanding where the technology development needs to occur, being that little bit ahead of the curve and doing something that benefits the nation. And I think that's something that we underestimate in our research community, that we're in it to make a difference. We're all here doing research that will lead to value creation and economic benefit for our country. And that's something that we can tap into a bit more, I think, in the future.
Tim?
I echo the comments of my colleagues. I think some of the exciting thing that occurs in Australia, so if I take that lens, we are a very collaborative nation. I think there's a lot to be acknowledged in the CRC programs and related activities that has brought a lot of organisations together. For example, on that Race 2030, I think there's 90 partners in it, and that's a lot. It's probably maybe too many. But when we look at some of the other activities, I think the thing for the future is the excitement around how do we create, to your point, Bronwyn, that clarity around impact. Because if we have clarity around impact, then we have clarity about mission. And with that, we can then actually understand our pathways to impact. How do we translate to industry so that industry actually captures that value and it creates value for the community? And to the point, both speakers have spoken to that as well. I think that's where we're very much on the journey in doing that. When we look at the collaboration that we have within Victoria as well as nationally, there's no university we all don't engage with, and there's no research institution I suspect we all don't engage with at some point. I think the exciting thing for us in this sector, given the amount of funding that you were saying before, is how do we scale? And how do we change some of those relationships at the appropriate time to a larger scale impact initiative? So that's the bit I'm really excited about, where we may be moving in that over the next decade.
And given that you've each talked about the fact that there's a what's in it for me, that happens at a university level, but also at an individual researcher level. Do you think there needs to be some changes in the measures for the researchers to have a measure more around collaboration and partnership of delivering impact to the business or industry environment?
I might just jump straight in there first. Not being a researcher by background, although having worked in research environments, I think it's important that we have an alignment between the goals at all levels. It's that particular zipper process. Now, it's important internationally to have citations and publications and grant funding, because that's a universal measure. But I think it's also important to recognise how do we stimulate that translation and impact model and ensure that people are recognised for that activity as well. And not everybody's going to do all of that, but I think we need to level out that playing field.
Thanks, Tim. Maria, did you want to contribute?
agree with that, but I also think that there's this idea where that there's applied research and there's fundamental basic research. And I wrote a piece for Store Energy newsletter recently because I thought about this. And actually, I remember a few days it was at Deakin was all research is research. I mean, every problem you can, if you come up with a good research question, you know, a really detailed industry problem can still have a really important research question to answer. And so as an academic, as a researcher, as a scientist, or as a PhD student, if you can see the interesting problem you're trying to solve, as well as the fact that if you solve that problem, you make an impact for society or for economically or whatever the impact might be, I think if that can be sort of made clearer to people, I know I struggle with my own team that it isn't like this is applied and this is fundamental. I mean, spectrum. And I think that's got to change. That attitude is embedded in our culture, actually. That, you know, applied research is, you know, it's okay research, and then there's this fundamental highfalutin nature science papers. We've got to change those measures, I think, and the ideas that we have around what research is.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And Bronwyn, did you also have some input on that?
Well, I'm you know, I always love hearing Maria's perspective. She was my mentor and helped me get my first ARC Discovery grant and showed me that I could, you know, develop my rope section in a way that, you know, would mean that I was competitive for ARC grants. And so I think, you know, what Maria articulated about that nexus between applied and fundamental, that you use your applied research to give you insights into industry trends and you know, future directions and societal needs, and you bring that back to your fundamental research, and you get this beautiful virtuous cycle where you get some very creative, tremendous outcomes.
On that topic of measures and industry engagement and commercialization outcomes, are you finding it easier to measure and monitor and track the impact? I mean, it's easy to say we need a more impact. I know from a industry perspective, sometimes it's very hard to track that in a tangible way. What have you learned, you know, over the last few years about measuring and monitoring impact, given that there's a significant focus on that measure at the moment? Maria, pick on you.
Interesting question, and I actually have asked my DVCR recently about that. What do we, you know, how do we monitor impact, and what do we mean by that? And there is no good answer to that. The answer really is that we haven't been, I think, historically very good at monitoring impact and continuing to monitor the impact that we have. I mean, I know I made a discovery maybe 20, 30 years ago, which is only now going into a device maybe. But, you know, and I'm seeing papers repeating some of the stuff we did 20 or 30 years ago. But, you know, do I think that was impactful back then? Gosh, yeah. But how do you measure? How do you know that that's impactful? And that's why this thing about citations comes up, which I don't think means impact at all. But, you know, the idea of if you have citations, that's impactful. Well, into industry, I guess it's jobs. From my perspective, is how many jobs has that discovery or that startup or that whatever you've done, how many jobs has that created? What sort of additional training have you done which has helped someone get out there and get a job in an area that's maybe, you know, a bit different to their PhD or their postdoc? It's around both creating new jobs, but also encouraging the people that we train to be able to see more broadly and go into areas which have a need in industry right now, not necessarily the little area they were trained in. But measuring impact, I personally, maybe a DVCR may have a much better answer than me, but me personally, I don't know how we do it. I don't know how we do it otherwise.
Bronwyn, since Maria's just thrown to you, and appreciate a DVCR's input on measuring impact at a university level.
Thinking about a lot too is, you know, Maria, what you articulated is that it takes 20 years to become an overnight success, right? So how do you know early on that you're on the right track, or how do you know early on that an idea or a discovery is going to have that impact? And we're thinking through what those early indicators are. I think that I know one of my industry partners articulates it as a kind of a celestial model, that you look at a star and a constellation and you support that constellation, and that's how he makes his decisions about how he invests in in research is that he looks for a constellation and supports the growth of that constellation. I think some of the other early measures are just how much industry wants to engage with you, that you have people knocking on your door asking you about where your research is heading and where you're going, and those things are some of the markers that you're on the right track. But it's very hard to pick what is going to be, you know, the next Wi-Fi or the next Gardasil very early on at those early stages of the research.
And Tim, from an RMIT perspective, what's the research doing with regards to measuring impact?
It's something we're really, to the other speakers, we're really looking into much more richly now. It's how do we translate more effectively? So can we actually see that more effective engagement with the industry partners? One measure is the duration and the longevity of some of those relationships as well, because that means you're actually servicing that organisation, or could perhaps be over-servicing that organisation. But that's a mechanism about that engagement process that links there. I think to your point, Maria, also there are citations are important because you're having intellectual impact, and you're actually potentially changing and on the shoulders of legends to great things achieved. And so it's important about that academic community and building that process. It's really hard to pick winners. I think, you know, having worked a little bit in some of the venture space, it's hard to pick, but you can pick trends. Perhaps to your point, Bronwyn, where are those trends or clusters going with regards to what the market's starting to draw us through into? And how do we actually get ahead of some of these things? And that's the tough stuff. If you're trying to be at the leading edge of your science or engineering, and, you know, the marketplace moves in another direction, it might be 20 years. And that's, you know, we see quite often with technologies that have come through. It's been a long haul. So we need to, I think it's important that we focus on that for the purposes of engaging with government and industry about the value that we create. I think the value, as you said, Maria, is around jobs. It's important. It's around jobs, and it's also, there's a lot of things that we can do in these softer areas around policy influencing and that actually will help governments make change for a better outcome in some areas. So there's tech process, and then there's the social aspects, I think, as a community we need to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, Maria?
So just thinking about what you said in terms of how do you stay at the lead ahead. Someone asked me in the chat about, you know, why don't we have energy battery manufacturing? Part of the problem is, it goes back to policy as well. Part of the problem is that you have to sometimes take risks and back a winner that you think might be a winner. So, you know, many of us, I thought, brought different technologies to our university and to government, maybe 5 years ahead of the time. And the battery area was a perfect example of that. 10 years ago, before Elon Musk came up and said, I'll solve your problem, South Australia, we went to government and said, we could do this here, right? We brought industry out to maybe do it, at Deakin actually. And there was no appetite. It was too risky, because why do we need that? And now we've got the same situation with hydrogen. Everyone's doing hydrogen because, whereas, you know, we were doing fuel cells at Monash 20 years ago, my first ever grant. And now go back to impact. That papers we wrote didn't get any 5 years ago. Now it's one of my most cited papers, because now people are going back to that. But, you know, at the time, people dropped hydrogen because lithium-ion batteries came up. So it's how can we crystal ball almost gaze and say, well, you know, how do we know what the next big thing is going to be, and let's lead that. Not let's just follow what Europe and, you know, let's lead. Let's actually take a punt, take a risk, and say we're going to be good at this.
Well, one thing we've got about 5 minutes to.
I think that's industry partnerships are incredibly important because intelligence on markets, and hydrogen has been absolutely market driven. You know, the market wasn't ready 10 years ago, now it is. And so that's where that intelligence, you get the insight from industry, is just so important to universities, and those relationships are everything.
Yeah, and that's exactly the question I was going to ask Bronwyn, was how do you track that, and how much of that do you get from industry? And also, if we jump to the skills area, how do you as a university identify the skill gaps and prepare enough in advance for some of those skills to be developed through the curriculum at the universities, such that you've got students and researchers coming through at a time when the sector is ready for them, or when there's a higher demand. You know, does that come through your industry partners as well, or are there other mechanisms that you get that? And this will need to be our last question that I can get each of your input on, I believe. Tim, did you want to start?
Sorry, Leonie.
Okay, Bronwyn, if you want to start first, yeah.
There are several mechanisms that we're using, the first of which is to make sure that our industry partnerships are really long-standing.
You're breaking up a bit, Bronwyn.
Yeah, apologies. I think long-standing industry partnerships are really important. Intelligence through horizon scanning reports is also really important. And am I still breaking up? That's great, Tim. I'll see if I can sort it out.
If we can go to Maria and then Tim while Bronwyn's sorting out her audio.
So really good question. To introduce new career, yes, you can go to industry partners and they say we need something in this space. You're training new battery engineers or chemists or whatever, and then you've got to go through the system of university, which is quite hierarchical, to then say, how do I introduce a new course? And when I first came to Deakin, we tried that around materials, electrochemistry, and we gave up in the end because it's just really hard, because the market drives what you teach. If your market analysis says no one's interested in doing materials, in energy or whatever it happens to be, then no one is going to put on a new course because it's too. University will take a risk, and it's bums on seats bringing us in the money. Therefore, you are not going to put on a course that might have only 20 students or 10 students, for example. So it's actually really challenging to do it traditionally. However, through these training centres and whatnot that we have opportunities there to look at doing more specific. And we're looking at this even in our own one, more specific training around an area for the community as well. And that might be a way of doing it with industry engagement as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Maria. And Tim, did you want to round off this question? And I think that's the last input. And unfortunately, we lost Bronwyn volume.
Leonie, if I may be bold, there's a question in the chat there about commercialisation that I can probably add a little bit to, given the great comments by the previous speakers on that other topic.
Yep.
And it is, we're told we're bad at commercialisation. How, who, or what will fix this? I think we're pretty hard on ourselves. We are basically, going back to the research, it comes in a TRL 2 and a bit maybe, if we have that. And industry, the challenge for industry is really to pick up anything that's probably less than 4, unless you've got a large-scale strategic engagement around a topic that you're going to drive. So if you're a major battery company, Maria, that you're going to be able to continue that because it's strategically aligned with what your what your commitment to the marketplace is. Going back to the government's consultation process around commercialisation, one of the things that worked really well in Australia, I thought, and getting back a few years now, probably around the turn of the century, so to speak, was things like R&D start. What we actually had was an ability to get to scale. We do proof of concept. We can get some early stage with CRCPs and things like that, and they're relatively small. We've got these fantastic activities funded out in the discovery space. How do we go to scale at a point at which the industry can come in? I think that's really important, and we haven't really seen that since that was removed a while ago. The other important thing, I think, is how do we look at whether we fund cash up front like they do in Israel and Sweden and places like that for the SME sector, versus having tax-driven R&D returns. You can only get a tax-driven R&D return if you're making a profit upon which you pay tax to get a return. If you're in an early stage startup or in a small SME, what you really need is the cash to stimulate that ability to get the product, whatever it is, to the next level where you can secure some third-party investment, perhaps like, as you mentioned earlier on, the VC funds that are out there. But I don't think we're bad at it. I think there's some steps that are missing. And when we look at other organisations overseas, bigger markets, probably a different type of university industry focal point around that and how they link in with the industry partnerships. I think Australians are really good at the research, really good at innovation. We just got to get that structure right.
Better. Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Tim. Bronwyn, did you just want to have some last comments as we're wrapping up this session?
feel like that scene in Spinal Tap where I'm making an appearance at the end. But and just I think trusted relationships with industry is really important, global relationships, so that we understand what's happening globally and what those global trends are. I'm a bit concerned that when we closed our borders, we closed our minds in Australia, and I'm starting to hear some of the 90s rhetoric about what we're doing as well. You know, we need to be really aware of what's happening in the rest of the world and to make sure that we are ahead of them and partnered with them, so that we have that deep tech transfer and deep knowledge sharing.
Yeah, no, terrific. And you know, as each of you are saying, the environment is right. The focus on clean technology is there. The funding is there. The government support is there. We need to be watching the policy regulatory space to make sure that you know, that there are not blocks or barriers in being able to introduce those technologies. But you know, with the rich researchers that we have across our universities and the level of collaboration that's occurring, I think the outlook is very positive. So thank you each for your contribution to this session today. Thanks.